Gentlemen, call to order the Borough of Crafton discussion meeting, April 8th, 2019. Flag salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call.
All right, Mr. Amendola.
Here.
Mr. Kraus.
Here.
Ms. Perry.
Here.
Ms. Glasser.
Here.
Ms. Damitz.
Here.
Mr. Rosario.
Here.
Mr. Lavasser.
Here.
Mayor Bloom.
Here.
Solicitor Corbold.
Here.
Public Works Director Kazarowski.
Here. All right. Moving on to the approval of the bills list dated April 8th, 2019. Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, approval of the bills list. Moving forward to the approval of the minutes dated March 25th, 2019.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Approval of minutes, thank you. Moving forward to citizen comments regarding agenda items only. At this time, citizens may address the Borough Council on any issue appearing on today's agenda. Only residents and taxpayers of the Borough of Crafton will be permitted to address the Council. Comments on non-agenda items will be taken at the end of tonight's meeting. Speakers will be permitted to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. Groups of people will be required to designate a spokesperson to represent them before the council, who may speak for a maximum of 10 minutes. Speakers are asked to use the microphone at the end at the speaker's stand. Clearly state their name and address for the record and keep comments brief and to the point. Please spell your name for the record. Thank you. This evening we have Mr. Roy Neiman. Your topic is the police.
She's first.
I'm gonna go first, if that's all right.
Amanda Argauer, 534 Willard Avenue, please.
Yes, I'm Amanda Ardauer, 534 Willard Avenue. I'm going to first introduce myself to offer transparency, because throughout this entire statement I asked for transparency from you all. I'm the one who attempted to run for council, who turned in my duplicate copy of the financial interest form 2 days late. I was subsequently taken to court by Councilwoman Coletta Perry and struck off the ballot. Actually by her lawyer. She was not there in court, but never fear, Borough Manager R.J. Susko was there to testify against me as well. I'm here to ask a few questions regarding the motion to hire a new police officer, and hope that there will be an open discussion amongst the council prior to the vote today. I'd like to hear more about the reasoning and research done to propose the need for an additional officer, and who analyzed the potential downstream impacts of hiring an officer and what those results were. Questions that I have are, did our current officers express the need for additional resources, or were they at least a part of the conversation? Have they expressed the need for any additional or upgraded equipment, and will hiring a new officer impact any of these ongoing purchases? Will this impact the availability or raises or overtime for our current officers? How was the final candidate selected, and does anyone on council have a personal relationship or friendship with this person? And also, how will this hire impact other areas down the road, like infrastructure? This is especially concerning after the negative media attention Crafton received last week regarding the year-long debate over who will repair Ingram Avenue. It's come to the point that Channel 11 News has highlighted the inefficient collaboration and decision-making skills of the current council and borough manager, and it was quite embarrassing for Crafton. So if we're aggressively pursuing additional resources for our police force, please offer transparency into why, and also please explain why this concern and the other concerns of the Crafton residents face every day, such as road quality and accessibility for the residents with mobility issues, are not being pursued with and resolved with equal fervor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I just want to address One item that you mentioned, and that is, you characterized the borough manager as testifying against you, but I just want the record to be clear that she was subpoenaed to attend by the petitioner in the case. She, and was asked and answered questions honestly and truthfully. I think it's not accurate to say that she was there to testify against you. She was subpoenaed and adhered to the subpoena. She called my office to see if she should go, and I told her that she should, that if you don't listen to a subpoena, she could be found in contempt of court, etc. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for the record. I appreciate your perspective, but I just wanted to put that on the record.
And having no law background, I appreciate your
Sure.
perspective as well.
Thank you. That's all I have.
You solicitor.
Sure.
All right. Mr. Neiman, please address council, name, address, please.
Wait, I'll finish, please. I don't have a printer to print out. My name's Roy Neiman, 102 Haldane. I'm here to address the motion to approve the hiring of a police officer. First of all, let me say, I was for this back in the fall. I just want to make it clear. I know it. You folks may have remembered it, maybe not. I approved it without.
I remember.
Yeah. I approved it without really delving into the subject. I've done further research, and I've come up with a bunch of things, or not a bunch, but a few things that we have to consider before we hire. I'm not against it if you can justify it. So first, the only debate I heard about this was, I believe, in the second budget meeting. And there was no, it was, we need a police officer, basically, discussion. I didn't hear anything about justification. That brings me to my second point. From being a citizen and sitting in on the council meetings, I've yet to hear any justification for this officer. Statistics such as crime going up, population has gone down. The crimes I've seen are nothing more than for the most part, break-ins to the unlocked cars, that kind of thing, vandalism. So, now here's my main point. Over 10 years, and you'll understand why in a minute, over 10 years, this is going to cost the borough over $1 million. And that's based on $100,000 for salary and benefits. It may be more, it may be less, but I wanted to point that out. And the question becomes, how do we pay for this? Now, I know we took $80,000 or $82,000 from the pool budget. They wanted to replace the liners this year. And they said, okay, we'll wait till next year. That was moved out of the pool budget and into hiring the officer. So that begs the question, okay, it's paid for this year. How do we justify paying it in the forthcoming years? Like I said, I've yet to hear any justification. So in saying that, it's going to cost us money to file, or the next budget, and onward, it's going to require a tax. What's that?
I see you 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. It's going to require a tax increase, in my opinion. Of all the people I've polled, everybody's fine with it. They want another police officer, but when you mention taxes, nope, game over. They don't want to pay more taxes. And I really think there needs to be justification. And I think if you go through the motion tonight to approve this hiring, I'm pretty sure I'm going to file a FOIA request to see how you actually did all this, because a lot of it was behind closed doors. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
I just real quick, yeah, you can come back up if you want. I just wanted to point a sort of piece of information regarding the pool, because I know this is something that a few people have asked about with the pool liner. So, at the first budget meeting, it was discussed as redoing the pool liner would be a capital upgrade that was, going to be invested in the parks. However, after I spoke with our public works director, he basically said, I think we can get a grant to do this if we bump it off into the next budget cycle, basically. So what we, it was not a one-on-one, trade-off. It was not like that came out of the budget to add an officer or anything, because of course that'd be something that would be a year after year, expense incurred. So definitely not a trade-off there. What we actually did was we switched our capital budget, which was a new line item added this year, to pursue a grant match for installing safety surfaces on all of the parks, which I think on the rec boards we discussed a bit with the rec board, with the meeting that I attended. So we recently got a cost quote for the main park safety surface, and we have the 2 pocket parks as well. So the line item for the capital improvements, which was switched from about 80 to around 30, is budgeted towards the grant match that we're hoping to get for the safety surface. So there's still something that we're pursuing regarding capital upgrades. Just FYI, I'm sure a lot of people care because the kids use this to play. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dan Sindrick, 45 Crichton Ave. And your topic is additional police.
Hello, Dan Sindrick, CINZRIC, 45 Crayton Avenue. I wanted to just give you some input as someone who's gone through this procedure in the past. In the early 2000s, council, when I was on council, we looked at adding a police officer. Some people wanted it wanted the number of police based on population on a per capita basis. Other people wanted it based upon budgetary requirements, budgetary limitations. What we decided at the time was use a comprehensive approach. And that was a formula that was devised by the Chiefs of Police Association, where we took the previous 12 months' calls, analyzed each one for emergency and non-emergency calls. The Chief of Police Association provided an hour time limit for each call. For example, running a stop sign was assigned a certain time period. A DUI was assigned a certain time period. A burglary, of course, would require more time. We came up, the 3 of us on council analyzed 12 months worth of calls, and we came up with the fact that Crafton needed between 7 and 8 police officers, patrol officers, including the chief. And using that comprehensive approach, really a performance-based approach, or a workload approach, we determined how many police we actually had to have, okay, between 7 and 8. And since then, I know that the Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing has a guidebook to also help you with this. We didn't have it at the time because the guidebook was, I think, developed in around 2010, 2012. I would hope that this council would have used something like that guidebook or something like the Chief of Police Association formula to determine how many police we have and do we really need to add another police officer at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Anthony Suba, 568 Broadhead Ave, police, and yeah.
Anthony Suba, 568 Broadhead. So I'm going to say I'm kind of shocked, to see that we're voting for a police officer without having prior public discussion. I kind of feel like the public was left out of this decision because, quite frankly, if you go on Facebook, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people have been discussing this. We don't know if we should or shouldn't. So I'm asking council, provide us a justification as to why we need another officer, whether it be coming from Chief Sumter or, what you did on your end to determine, hey, we need to add another officer. The main reason is, I'd like to know what the total compensation is going to be for the officer per year, not just their salary, but their total compensation, including all their benefits, what the cost of the borough is going to be over the next 5 and 10 years, and essentially where the money's coming from. Because as a taxpayer in this borough, there's other things that I feel need to be addressed as well. if a lot of the roads are falling apart, including the brick roads, a lot of the main roads, a lot of the infrastructure. So I want to see how would hiring another officer impact other projects, if our taxes are going to be raised, or if the borough's going to be borrowing money in some other way. I want to look at it from a fiscal standpoint. How are we going to pay for this person? Currently, Crafton has 9 police officers that patrol Thornburg and Crafton. And really, I just want justification as to why we need more than 9 officers. Our neighboring boroughs, for instance, Greentree has 10. But the difference between Greentree is the fact that they have all the business parks. They have all the other offices, and you would think they would have more officers. Considering that Crafton is mainly residential, 9 officers is, I feel it's a good amount when you compare, like Robinson, for instance, has 30 officers. So if you start taking a look at the differences of our surrounding neighborhoods, what is the justification as to needing another officer, especially when there's agreements with the surrounding boroughs and surrounding municipalities to come in and step in and help? And the other thing is, has anybody looked into, reaching out to Ingram, for instance, who only has 3 full-time and 4 part-time officers, and combining police officers, such as like up north, for instance, they have Northern Regional, where municipalities actually work together and they share the cost, versus each of these small boroughs that are anywhere from a half a mile to a mile and a half square mile having their own police force and having anywhere from 6 to 10 officers, versus combining resources and utilizing each other and patrolling. So if you guys can justify fiscally, what that is the main thing.
Thank you, sir. Edward?
So, I believe this is with respect to the motion amending Chapter 214 of the Crafton Borough Code of Ordinances, Vehicles and Traffic.
Please come forward.
Edward Alo, 568 Broadhead Avenue. I believe it was about a year ago, myself and my husband originally approached this council requesting that council look into the parking issues in front of St. Philip's Church. It's my understanding that the traffic study was performed and that the traffic study suggested to make this portion non-parking. I really can't tell from the description of the motion, but if that is the case, I strongly urge this council to adopt that. Just this past weekend, my husband and I were going out to celebrate my 30th birthday with my parents, and that portion was clogged up both sides, as well as the side street right in front of the main entrance of the church. And there were people parked actually in the portions that were highlighted yellow by a hydrant. Police officer drove by. We did try to flag him down. We got the similar response that we're used to. Until council makes it non-parking, they can't do anything about it, even though it's parked in front of a fire hydrant. For these reasons, I respectfully request that you pass this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to mention real quick before we move on, because I know that when we discuss larger topics, for example, we have our auditors coming up next, I don't want to lose the thread of what seems to be a really important conversation about the condition of the roads, in particular Ingram Avenue. So just sort of for a very brief background, I've been here about 7 months. This is the first time that I've been here through a paving program with the borough. So I can't speak to what any prior managers have recommended or what went on before me, but I know it was the priority of council, and Public Works Director, engineer, and I all recommended that our portion of Ingram Avenue do be included in the paving program this year. Again, I know there's been a couple questions, some conflicting information, so just to be clear, we are going to presumably, I mean, I've had the word from the city that they are willing to work on a cooperative agreement where basically they pave and we pay them back, because it's typically more affordable when you fall under the city's paving contract. So we are putting out to bid the other roads that were selected with the assumption that we will be splitting the cost for Ingram Avenue, our portion, with the city. However, if for some reason that agreement does not go through, Crafton will be paving the portion of Ingram Avenue that falls within the borough. That's just you know, no matter what, it's getting done this year. We heard loud and clear this was something that people really cared about, and it was, you know, potentially a safety hazard. So rest assured, no matter what, it's gonna get done this summer.
Thank you, Manager Sulko.
Yeah.
All right. We have guests this evening, Mahu Dusul, Accounting, and auditors.
There was no copies.
Yeah, I think that you mailed those already, so everyone should
Yeah.
probably have them, yeah.
So this is the 2018 Borough Audit, the review by the auditor. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'm Brian McCall, I'm a partner with Mara Dissel, and this is Samantha, she's the manager on engagement. At this point, we have completed the 2018 audit. You are required to submit to the state by March 31st. That has been completed. And then additionally on top of that, you have that's a regulatory filing. Then you also have a set of financial statements, you prepare some other documents. So I'm just going to hit some highlights on those. If you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. The one letter we issue is a letter to the board. It's called Communication to Those Charged with Governance. That's pretty much a standard letter that we send out. There was nothing in that letter really that is unusual or unique. We put things in there if you had some weird accounting or there wasn't a standard to cover how you were accounting for something. If you had any really significant disclosure that was unusual in the world of government, you really don't have any of that, so that letter is pretty much boilerplate. In addition to that, we also issue a management letter, which is our recommendations for any improvements to internal control. So as part of our audit process, really what we're responsible for is to give an opinion on the financial statements. So the financial statements, all of that information comes from management. Although we help put it in this format and everything, really in the end what we're doing is giving an opinion on the financials that says if you were going to issue debt or someone wanted to look at these financial statements and they looked at the numbers and disclosures here, these financial statements would present a reasonably accurate picture of the borough's finances. So within that, although the purpose of the audit is not a test of internal controls, we do as part of the audit under standard controls, we look at transactions, we sample transactions. Within your management letter, we really only had one comment this year, and it relates to segregation of duties. It's really a comment we have for most municipalities of your size and smaller, where at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do with the staff size you have. And so to get that letter, and it used to be, say, 3 pages with 7 comments, to get it down to this point is pretty good. And there's been effort over the years to get to that point. So I would just encourage you to continue with things you're doing internally, the controls in place, and really stick to those, because it really, that comment, like I said, we probably have it for more than 50%, maybe 75% of municipalities we work with in Allegheny County. So it's very common, but I just encourage you to keep that up. To only have the one comment if it is a good sign. Then I would just hit some highlights here on the actual financial statements. So these are the results for 2018. Your financial statements are presented on a cash basis for accounting. So money in and money out. They're not full accrual like a business might be, or you have debt and fixed assets or anything. We did issue on this report an unmodified opinion, which is our best type of opinion we can issue, to say that we were able to get that assurance over these numbers and conduct our audit without any issues. We received excellent cooperation from everyone in the office as part of the audit process. Like I said, everything was completed on time. On page 3 of the financial statements, that's your balance sheet. So that's basically as of 12/31/18. It showed that the general fund had about $1.5, $1.6 million and about another $700,000 in capital and other project funds. So about $2.2 million in fund balance as of the end of the year. Then page 4 of the financials shows your revenues and expense for your year. That's basically your P&L statement. During the year, the general fund, your revenue expense budget's about $4.3 million. You had a positive change in fund balance of about $100,000 there. So $100,000 to the good in the general fund, you have your fund balance of about 2.2 million as compared to your entity-wide expenses of about 5 million. That balance, that's pretty consistent with what we see in local governments around Pittsburgh. Really, you have to have a little bit extra there because the second you have a capital project, it eats right into that fund balance right away. So as far as the level of fund balance for your budgetary size, it's pretty standard for what we would expect to see. To jump to page 6, you also have your proprietary funds, so that's passed through the Alcoasand fees and charges. And once again, it was a positive change in that position of about $100,000, with about 1.4 in fund balance there as of the end of the year. The next thing I would like to point to, page 7, so you have both your uniform and non-uniform pension plan. Those assets are presented in these financial statements, so the balance in those investment accounts is about $5.5 million. Really, there's been more focus over the past couple of years on pension liabilities and funding that pension liability. Really, it's because of your requirements under Act 205. It's for most places that don't have city in their name and have the challenges that cities do. Most municipal plans are pretty well funded because they follow the Act 205. So really, adding up your police and non-uniform plans, you are pretty well funded between the two. There's no red flags or anything there to point out as far as that goes. With regard to your any debt you have outstanding, you do have one note that it's this year. I'm not sure if that's up to date, but this year, I believe in May, will pay off, and that's gonna you'll go from debt service of $250,000 down to $115,000, depending on if you issue any other debt. But that was never related to the eminent domain case, so that's kind of them taking that out of the mix and getting you to a level of debt service level ongoing. Beyond that, so there's the numbers of the financials, and I kind of just highlighted some of the things in the footnotes there. And then there's just some additional supplemental information at the back of the financials that drills down a little bit more detail because you do have a number of funds within your accounting system. But that's my brief summary of the year. Like I said, good cooperation from management. The audit was completed timely, and really this should be the best type of opinion we could issue as auditors. So if anyone has any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In January of 2018, our former manager said that she came before this body and said we had about a $1 million surplus. And so what you're telling us here tonight is that at the end of 2018, December 2018, we have a $2.2 million surplus?
Yeah, depending on how you look at it, if you look at the surplus as a cumulative number, like how much do you have in the bank as of that day, at the beginning of the year, you had about 1.8 million. At the end of the year, about 2.2. So 483,000 within your governmental funds, which excludes the sewer. There's about another 100 in the sewer. So the surplus during 18, surplus, not versus budget, but just how much more cash did you have on the last day versus the first day, would have been close to about 600,000 during 2018.
I think, let me just jump in real quick, because Fred, I think I understand the question you're asking. So probably remember how we talked about the rainy day fund during the budget? That seems like what she was referring to when she said a surplus. Was that sort of the reserves that we had built up over the years, whether it was because we had an operating surplus year to year to year? It sounds like at the end of 2018, we had an operating surplus of about $100,000, which would add $100,000 to that rainy day fund, which it sounds like that 2.2 million is essentially.
Yeah, of the 2.2 million, you have, really there is over 500,000 of that is restricted for use on highway roads and streets. So that money, whether, I don't recall off the top of my head whether that's liquid fuels or through bonds.
I think it's part liquid fuels and
You have the
part
millage as well.
we still, yes, we have a payment from the previous road program. I guess we had some issues with the contractor that was selected last summer, so they've still got an outstanding payment that will come out of that account when they complete the work.
Yeah, so of that amount, 567 is specifically set aside for the capital projects, but the unassigned within the general fund, so that's where you haven't said we're using it specifically for this or this. At the end of the year, the general fund was 1.5 million on budgeted expenditures of.
1.5 at the end of the year.
Yeah, 1.5 at the end of the year.
So let me ask you a question. The rumors going around the borough are that if we hire this police officer, we're gonna have to raise taxes. That's what some of the rumors have been traveling around town. So let me ask you as an expert, would you tell me that a $1.5 million surplus, we can afford to hire a 10th
I
officer?
thought someone might ask me this question as I was listening. I mean, I think what I can say from the auditor standpoint, and what I'll say is that unrestricted fund balance as compared to your revenue and expenses for the year, so 1.5 fund balance in the general fund and about 4.5 million in expenses, that would be somewhere, you're somewhere below 50%. You don't want to be below 15 or 20% with unassigned within your general fund. So I can tell you what I see out there and what we recommend as far as you don't want to go below a certain point normally. But I'd like to avoid commenting on the specific issue of the police officer. I could, but your fund balance is in a healthy place generally speaking.
Yeah, it's healthy. I mean, if we had 1.5 million in December, it should still be there.
Yeah, you've
Unless it was squandered away this past year.
Go ahead.
So, to the point of you wanna have at least maybe 15–20%, I know you're referring to it as unreserved fund balance, but I'm just gonna use the word rainy day fund because it was a term that we discussed during the budget workshops. So, to have about, I'd say 2.5, 3 months is a good amount of operating expenses that you wanna have in your rainy day fund minimum at any given time. So our monthly operating expenses probably hit around 350,000, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that going lower than $1 million, give or take. Now, again, because this is the first budget that I've been here to put together, I can't really speak to the way revenues and expenses were projected with my predecessor. Because we have, maybe, say $400,000 to sort of have wiggle room for in our rainy day fund right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that will keep going up year to year, because the way that we've increased services over year, plus just sort of the general 3% inflation, means that we're kind of on par after this year with what we take in and what goes out. So of course, any expenses that we increase, decrease, whatever, would affect our operating surplus, but that's sort of separate from this 1.5 number that you could almost think of like a savings account. So if the question is, do you want to hit that, that'd be like spending from your savings account, hoping that maybe eventually you can cover the expenses with what.
Well, when we approved it unanimously in October to be put in the budget, it was an all go, and we all agreed to it.
Yeah, I'm totally separate from, I'm just looking to sort of define the terms.
So I mean, this tax thing that people are talking about is I believe, unfounded.
Alrighty, well,
Thanks, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but,
That's okay.
we're all looking for answers here.
thank you. Any other comments for council?
No, thank you very much, we appreciate it.
Thank you for coming this
Thanks
evening.
for coming.
Excuse me, I went off. I don't have any sound.
All right, moving forward to the president's report. I'll keep it brief. Continuing to work with the solicitor and the director of public works and the mayor's office, reviewing the negotiation process
I don't hear any sound.
for the public works. They're making good progress, and we had our last meeting for engineering a few weeks ago.
Can you hear it better? Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't hear them.
We're continuing to listen to everybody's concerns.
Mr. President, would you speak into the microphone? She can't hear you.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Alice, can you hear me now?
I can now.
Alright, great. So just keeping it brief for you, I'm working with the manager, the solicitor, and the public works director on the public works contract. They're doing a great job. And the manager is putting together metrics for council to review. She has some drafts here, and she hasn't got to any of the graphical representation yet, but she's doing a great job. And we've been in close communication, so thank you all for working with me on these topics during the off weeks. Appreciate it. Mayor's report.
I would like to hold off.
Thank you. Solicitor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few updates. Council, you should have seen in your packets or uploaded on the shared drive, as it were, two ordinances. One is the shade tree ordinance, the other is a traffic ordinance. Both are on the agenda for approval.
For
advertising, correct? And I wanted to make two quick comments on the shade tree ordinance. And RJ, you can certainly jump in. RJ intended not to include this section when we communicated, or I missed it because you crossed it out, one or the other. This is the 29-14 establishment of a shade tree reserve fund. So that's something that is not legally mandated, and her opinion is not to include it. The only thing is, if you would want to do it later, you'd have to re-advertise to add it, but I don't think that you foresee that as being an issue. So unless council wants it included, I will remove it at RJ's direction. And then secondly, on the traffic ordinance, we are waiting for Gateway. They've been working on the paving program. And we're waiting for them to take a look at the parking on East Crafton, the angled parking, the one-way change. The rest of the ordinance is good. I have an email from Director Kazarowski related to stop signs. So I think we're good to go on that. As soon as we receive the Gateway report, then I'll be able to advertise this. I also have yet to formally advertise the rec board ordinance, which increased the number of members. I was hoping to sort of package it up. I think you get a better rate with the paper if you put the ordinances together. So my hope would be to advertise all three of these for adoption. If I'm confident that Gateway will be done by the 23rd of this month, I could advertise it for the first meeting in May. Otherwise, it will be advertised for the last meeting in May, which is on the last Wednesday, because the fourth Monday is Memorial Day, so that will be on the 29th. So look for those to come up on the agenda sometime in May. And then I know you have the franchise renewal under your report, and I can chime in if you need me to.
Yeah,
So that's the end of my report.
Okay, it's sort of just rolling right into yours, because the first one's agenda item detail, and the first thing is on the agenda are the two motions you just discussed. So, just to elaborate a little bit on the shade tree ordinance, shot this info out in an email, so forgive me if you've heard this already, but for the public's benefit. Basically, this was something that the council president brought up in the fall. He wanted us to sort of undertake a full update of what our shade tree governing code was. So we took some time, did some research, looked at basically what other boroughs similar to our size were doing, similar to our scope of operations, what could we realistically handle, what's enforceable, and pulled a couple ordinances, namely Carnegie and Swickley were the two that seemed to be most useful as model ordinances. There are organizations such as Tree Pittsburgh is one that provide model ordinances, but the one that they provide is from State College, which has an entire department that has arborists in it. We do not have that many people. So we had to find something that was a little scaled down. So we provided this to the Shade Tree Commission for review. We provided this to code enforcement, marked it up, sent it over to the solicitor. He took a look at it and sort of repackaged it in a Crafton draft, which is what the council has received for review today. Regarding the Shade Tree Reserve Fund, I think that's because Swickley's Shade Tree Maintenance Program, regarding the trimming of trees, is a little more built out. As a borough, you're technically able to levy part of your millage that's reserved for shade tree maintenance, similar to the way that you can do so with a road fund. However, at this time, we're just looking to incorporate the maintenance into our general fund. Well, we're not levying a tax, that's reserved for it. And we're still kind of, working out with the Shade Tree Commission how we want to go forward with permitting, collecting fees, sort of assessing costs. So for now, I would suggest that we hold off on it unless we really feel that there is an issue where we're not, spending the appropriate amount of money on shade tree maintenance after we pass this. And then it's a simple ordinance update, which, is not at great cost. So that's why I would recommend just holding off on that one for now, rather than jumping in and trying to administer something that we're not exactly sure how we want to work for us right now.
The ordinance is very good, by the way, so
Yeah.
Swickley's ordinance is very good, so I was happy to receive it, and the comments that you had and Susan had on it, they were great, so I think we're in a good spot.
So that's a positive review from him, I'll take it. Regarding the traffic change ordinance, just a brief reminder that we discussed stop signs at the intersection of Harris and Clearview at a resident's request a few meetings ago. Of course, we've discussed the parking near the Broadhead Avenue intersection. The section that is designated as no parking in the proposed ordinance is from the intersection of Broadhead basically down to I think that's an auto body shop there, so pretty much the length of the curb until you get to parking lot there is what would be designated as no parking, as well as when you're getting towards Steuben Street intersection, and so when traffic is coming down the hill, they don't have to be dodging cars along there. The East Crafton section, and what Gateway has suggested, they would benefit from studying, is basically how many angled parking spots we could fit on that road before they recommend that they turn it one way and paint the lines. So that's just sort of what we're waiting on, and we wanted to make sure that we actually get the road program out.
Would like handicap parking be possible there? Because I know the reason why people park on the street is.
Well, so that would
because it's
still be,
funny.
yeah, right. But that is a relevant question. So the idea is that the parking spots, instead of just being down the side of the street, would be angled on one side so as to fit more parking spots that could be of the same type. I think I've got, Johnston Street was also parking only on one side, and that was at the mayor's request a while ago. So that's everything that's contained in the traffic change ordinance. Regarding the other items on the agenda, clearly we've had some comments on the police hire motion. This is one that was requested to be put on by the Civil Service Commission. They provided the 3 top candidates. That is for council's review, as well as some financial information that if you wish to discuss, I am ready to go at the council president's request. Public Works 2019 road program, I think we kind of addressed that towards the citizen comments phase. Although Ingram Avenue is not in our bid because we are looking at doing a joint bid with the city with a reimburse. Again, if we have to put out another bid for just that road because something falls through, we'll do it. Otherwise, Crafton Boulevard is on there, South Linwood, I believe. We were looking at potentially rounding off, there's a traffic island in the middle of it, so it's a one-way street, and then it branches out here and here at the Ewing Road intersection. We thought maybe we might be able to round off a curb, and just sort of, not deal with the traffic island maintenance issue, but the turn radius just wasn't looking right with the engineers today, so they basically have to go in and restore the traffic island to repave the road, so it's gonna look the same. But we did kick around a little pocket park idea. I just can't really make it safe for the school buses, unfortunately. So that's sort of the final presentation of the road program bid by the borough engineers, and that will be advertised for a May 7th bid opening. Last thing, again, this is something the council president requested. You want to review Kirsten Pompatello's application letter of interest for the planning commission term. So her appointment motion is on the agenda. Finally, in the discussion items section, I just felt that fit better than trying to go into providing all this information in my my manager's report and then coming back and having a discussion about pool wages, summer help, different things like that. But there are a few suggestions that were brought to me by one of the pool managers from last year, sort of a more general discussion that the public works director has brought up about summer help wages and kind of staying competitive with the market so we're not losing, our returning employees. So we will get to that at the end. So that's sort of the detail on the agenda items for tonight. Very briefly, Verizon franchise renewal. This is cable franchises basically have agreements to operate in various municipalities. I believe this is something we do jointly with our Shar West cog here. I personally have not been through a franchise renewal public hearing, so I'm gonna kick it over to Steve for elaborating on sort of how this process goes, what to look for.
It's really an opportunity for the residents to comment on the Verizon's services in the community, things they'd like to see improved or changed, etc. The agreement is being negotiated by Dan Cohen's office on behalf of the entire COG. So whatever feedback we receive at the public hearing, we will push through to Mr. Cohen's office, and they can try to address that with Verizon. It is a prerequisite before you adopt a new cable franchise agreement to hold a hearing like this. And it's really informal. We'll just open the floor for comments from the public. Folks can comment or not, and then close it, and that's the end of it. There won't be any decisions made the night of the hearing. They are suggesting that we do it in the very near future, so I would just suggest you pick a meeting. They provided us with an ad that we can use, and we can go from there. If you handle it by the end of May, I think that will be fine. That's all.
So unless there are any questions on that, yes.
Hawthorne, but did you come up with an utilities, are you doing that one?
We've actually reached out with the utility company. That was on the 2018 road budget. That was supposed to be formed by the contractor last year. Gas company came in and said that they had plans to do the work. So actually the responsibility is half Borough, half gas company. We sent the quote out to the gas company, showing what our contracted cost is, and what their cost would be for restoration work. They're going to get back to us. They haven't got back to us yet, but Hawthorne Avenue will be paved this year. It was on the 2018 road program, and half will be reimbursed by the gas company.
And just real quick, I sort of tack onto the road program item from the agenda detail. Please remind me, did we end up putting Highland on the bid, or are we gonna do that in-house?
No, Island's on the bid. Island's
Okay,
part of the
all right, so
2019 program.
just to correct myself, we also have Highland Avenue included in the road bid program that's coming out. You may see a couple fewer roads this year. That's because part of the road fund was intended to be used for a Green Light Go grant match, which there are 4 separate traffic signals within the borough that receive significant state funding that we do have to match. So that was something that sort of had started before I got here, but that's where it ended up plugging into the budget. So ideally, assuming that we incur most of the construction match this year, the road program should be bumped back up to normal.
Just a point of order, I mean, I've been here for 4 years, and I think that Crafton has a pretty aggressive road program. They do well with the streets. The big problem with the brick streets, and I think we discussed different solutions and way to resolve those brick streets. And just a comment on Ingram Avenue. Actually, what happened on Ingram Avenue with the city of Pittsburgh portion, there was a collapsed catch basin that was pointed out to the city of Pittsburgh, not only by this department, but I think the residents themselves. And that plate was placed by the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority after, I guess, the number of incidents that occurred there. And I got the one call, they'll be on that this week, to do the repairs of that catch basin. So just for the record, it wasn't Crafton Borough's responsibility, it was the city of Pittsburgh. And we've worked together with the city of Pittsburgh on a number of paving projects. Crafton Boulevard, for those who don't realize it, in front of Crafton School, half of that is the city of Pittsburgh, half is Crafton Borough's. Chartiers Avenue, half is the city of Pittsburgh, half is Crafton Borough. Mueller Avenue, half is the city of Pittsburgh. We've been very successful working with the city of Pittsburgh on co-op agreements. And previously, the week before, we met with the councilwoman in charge of public works of the city of Pittsburgh, and she assured us that the city of Pittsburgh was going to pave Ingram Avenue. And they do about $12 million of paving in a year, so their cost per square yard is a lot cheaper than Crafton Borough's at $400,000 a square yard. So it'd be better for Crafton to piggyback with the city and move that project forward, just to put that out there. And for the record, I want to commend the manager on the response to the media. When I was with the city of Pittsburgh, the media are tough. And their response that we're doing this regardless if the co-op agreement goes to the city of Pittsburgh or not. Crafton's going to do their portion, which happened on Ballwick Road. Ballwick Road is another city Crafton line. You can see the new pavement was done 3 years ago, was done by Crafton Borough. The city chose not to do it, big cracks still didn't repave it. So all that information, just corrected and clarified, that's what's going on with Ingram Avenue and other locations in the city, Crafton Borough with the city of Pittsburgh.
One question, Park Street.
Park Street is a brick street. I know that there were some questions. The brick has been restored. The big area that you see in front of that one driveway was done by the borough. My recommendation is to pave it. I think we had a resident come in and ask us to do brick restoration. North Emily's paved, South Linwood's paved, the bottom street of Park is paved. My recommendation to the Council President and Public Works Committee is go in and resurface that, do a binder block overlay. I met the engineer to look at it and get a price for it. My recommendation for brick streets, you say your brick streets like Crafton, you put your money in that. Belvedere, I know it's been a big discussion about going back to brick. 5-year plan is trying to get the street, brick streets back together on Belvedere, Crafton, and the streets you really want to say.
All right, so, next topic on the manager's report, just sort of a brief announcement for the spring, summer newsletter. Charisma, our borough secretary, had put out a call, to different organizations, sort of the people that had spots in the last inaugural, reissue of the quarterly borough newsletter. So if anybody who's listening that is part of one of those organizations or has a spot in the newsletter, please get that to her by the end of the week. I still need to decide if I'm writing a manager's report, so you're not alone if you haven't sent anything in yet. But we're looking at this year. We had been shooting for quarterly, but weren't too sure of what the cost would be since the newsletter is something that we're bringing back. The previous one was paid for by a grant, and basically just let people know that there was sort of an alert service that we were going to be using, so the costs were pretty different. We hit about, I want to say $3,000 for postage, printing, distribution, all of that. Which is kind of, we had hoped it was gonna be a little cheaper, but you go through the process the first time you learn. We're gonna fix it, budget-wise, at least for next year. But so we're gonna look at doing, we sort of did like a winter 2018 into 2019, for the first try, I don't know what to call it, try issue of the newsletter. Spring, summer, we're gonna have pool information, Crafton celebrates different recreational activities over the summer. And then we're looking at probably publishing a sort of a fall, winter wrap-up, and then adjusting the line item next year so that we can get on a more regular quarterly schedule. So just FYI, we're hoping that'll hit the mailboxes some point, early mid-May. As long as everybody gets their stuff in, then we can get it to print. Final item on my report, I just wanted to note that I did a day attendance of the day-long, that's Allegheny League of Municipalities Spring Conference this year. We had a couple other council members that went as well. I think it's a conference where they've improved the profile of the educational offerings quite a bit over the last several years. It's changed a lot for those who maybe attended further back in the future. I've only been to, I think, 2 or 3 of them before, so I couldn't tell you what it was like in the 90s. But so they had a really nice couple of events where they discussed tax delinquency, blight enforcement, women's networking lunch where they had a great speaker about team dynamics. Just, a couple different educational topics, opportunity to connect with some of the different vendors. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has about the material or, how the trip was or whatever, but overall, good educational opportunity, so I appreciate that we've included a staff continuing ed budget line item this year.
Thank you.
Yep, that's all that I have, unless there are any questions on anything.
Just, you have the spot to put the rain date, if it rains or thunders or...
For the newsletter, yeah, I did mention that's something we want to with the whole stuff.
Okay.
But you have commercial speaking.
What did you say?
I asked if Marcia would speak into the mic, please.
Okay.
It was, wanted to make sure that the rain dates, and if they close the pool, how you get refunds on what so that when they close the pool, people get refunds, so they know which program to follow, or that we have something in place for that.
Thank you, Marcia.
All right, we're gonna move forward. All right, committee reports. Have we received any reports from any of the given committees?
I don't have anything written specifically.
All right, I'm just gonna
Usually just go down the list.
go down the list. Administration committee, Chairman Perry.
Not much to add, except that I have gotten a number of extremely positive compliments on the newsletter. by people who tend to be quite critical. They said that it was worthwhile spending on it and that it had useful information.
Yeah, just shout out to Charisma, by the way, she put the design together, did a wonderful job, so.
Yes, you did.
And the other accomplishment, that milestone is that we now have live data going directly to Jordan on various inspections and other things that will have tax implications. So we should be seeing higher level of collection and more and seeing that turn faster than it has in the past.
And I will just add, again, shout out to Charisma and Catherine, because we had Mark Schuster from Turnkey Taxes come in a couple times, sort of give them, you know, a more expanded tutorial on how to input data into the system, and they took off with it. And I just sat there at my desk listening to them go, oh, what if we do this? What if we do this? Maybe it could be improved if we do this, you know, why don't we make the suggestion? And so they've put a lot of hours and time into making sure that the data that they have is more accurate, basically, and we can increase our collectibles. So,
And Jordan has confirmed their live stream receipt of that data.
Thank you. Is that
That's it?
Okay, thank you. Parks and Rec.
Just have a senior dinner the 23rd.
Alrighty. Everything's going well? All right. Public safety.
Yes, I have a prepared statement. It's 14 pages long, but it's big lettering, so it'll only take me a couple of minutes so I can see it. So probably most of you or all of you got the packets from the chief of police this past week, a week or so ago. Did you all get the packets? Read over that information concerning this police officer situation?
Yes.
Everyone got them?
Yes, sir.
Read them over? Okay. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things in that report, and this will shed some light perhaps to our audience when it comes to this police officer situation. From our analysis, we discovered that violent crimes in Crafton occur at a rate higher than in most communities of all population sizes in America. The chance of a person will become a victim of a violent crime in Crafton, such as armed robbery, aggravated assault, rape, or murder, is 1 in 484. And then also, the chances of there being property crimes in Crafton is 1 in 27. In the Northeast of the United States, the average number of officers per 1,000 inhabitants is 2.8 officers. If we round that up to 3 per 1,000 inhabitants, then we should have 18 officers on our police department. Now, if we round it down to 2 officers, then per 1,000 people, then we should have at least 12 officers on our department. And that doesn't take into account that we cover Thornburg. We're contracted to do Thornburg's police work. People are generally more aggressive and less compliant these days. We see it every day on TV. Sometimes we only have one officer working on a shift. We're putting that officer in a dangerous situation. I'd like to see some of our officers focus time on a source resource officer. I'd like to see them initiate helpful life-saving programs for our schools. 2018 was by far the worst year on record for gun violence in schools. Generally, a bad guy doesn't go to a high school where he's going to get resistance from bigger kids. He targets the smaller schools where the little kids are. To start this process over, if we don't act tonight and we have to start this process over, it's going to cost the borough money. It's going to be advertising, testing, physical agility testing, all the expenses that we have already incurred to get to this point. So we will incur those expenses again. We as elected officials have the primary responsibility to do all that we can to keep our residents safe and their children safe. So we need to be proactive and not reactive. In one of those school massacres where an officer didn't immediately take action and go into the building, which would have saved some lives, we realized from that one school massacre that there's only one thing worse than getting killed, and that's living with the fact that we could have done something and we didn't take that step. We too are in that situation, and we need to make the proactive decision to do the right thing for our community and for their children. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any member of the council have any questions?
Are we doing this now, or are we gonna wait till the motion on the floor?
You can, this is public safety discussion, you can have.
You can ask questions.
Oh, wait. All right, anybody have any other questions for public safety chair? All right, hearing none, moving forward. All right, Public Works Committee.
Leave it to you, Mr. Pastor.
All right, been working with the engineer, the Public Works Director, and the manager. A couple of issues that have come up is the American Water, People's Natural Gas, and the efforts through coordinate PA. The manager is going to be working with me moving forward to investigate opportunities to work with American Water. We noticed a couple of years ago that American Water was quite active, and we've noticed that there's less activity now, so we're interested in seeing what the future holds for our municipality as we embark on our own infrastructure enhancements associated with our stormwater and sanitary system. Last week, I did ask the Public Works Director, the manager, and the engineer to just give an overview of Park. They're doing an evaluation, preliminary discussion with the engineer and the Public Works Director. Said that, you know, essentially there are only a few homes on that, so the justification for a complete reconstruction at this time may not be there. However, through discussion with the manager, we're going to see if American Water has any infrastructure that they need to put in the ground. As we know, our water lines are pretty old, so there's an opportunity to work with one of the utilities. We will take that opportunity, and from there, the Public Works Director and engineer are evaluating opportunities for a overlay for Park. So we're listening to everybody's concerns. We do understand that there's many streets in the municipality that need to be reconstructed, and we're going to continue going down that path. One of the topics that came out of our last engineering meeting with Gateway Engineers was, you know, a capital improvements spreadsheet. So we're looking at what capital improvements we need to make over the next several years, potentially decades. And right now, Manager Susko, we're around $20 million of capital.
That's the total wish list right now.
Yeah, total wish list. So we're evaluating, you know, by essentially putting metrics in and figure out what the priority is. So one of the things I suggested is those items that are related to compliance issues be weighted in the matrix as well. So once we get that from the engineer and from the manager, that will be shared with council. At the last planning commission meeting, I shared with the planning commission that we were investigating all these opportunities and that we would share our plans, future plans for infrastructure and our future plans with Alpsan with them. So if that's possible, I would like to share what we're able to share with the planning commission so they're able to put it into their model.
Yeah, I haven't received an updated capital plan from the engineers yet. I think that they were kind of just plugging in
Yeah.
sort of, now, there was something that was done, I think in April of 2018, so that would have been before I was here, but again, it was sort of this preliminary wish list. We knocked a couple things out in between then and when I got here. Clearview Phase 5, right? Yeah,
Yep.
Clearview Phase 5 was one of them, just a couple other little things that sort of got crossed off the list and more things have been added. So I mean, the spreadsheet exists
Yep.
in the previous form, but the engineers are kind of doing what they do with it, adding quantity costs and things like that, so I'm as soon as I get it,
Yeah.
I'm
Any, ma-
happy to pass
any,
it along.
any maps, anything that we have to share with the planning commission would be appreciated, just so they know what the master plan at this point is for the community. So that's about that.
Mr. President,
Yes.
can I have 10 more seconds? I left something out of my little presentation here, and I wanted to
Yes.
just touch on 10 seconds,
Yes.
okay? This is something else that the chief of police found on the PA crime website that he researched. And it has to do with livability, amenities, cost of living, that kind of thing. So Crafton scores an 80% when it comes to livability for Crafton. 80% out of 100, not bad. Amenities, we got an A+. Cost of living, a B-. Employment, a C. Housing, A. Schools, A-. Weather, D+. Crime, D+. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna close committee reports and move forward with the business agenda. Thank you for everybody's contribution this evening. Moving forward, administration. Motion to advertise an ordinance amending Chapter 29 of the Crafton Borough Code of Ordinances, Park and Shade Tree Commission. So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving forward to a motion to advertise an ordinance amending Chapter 214 of the Crafton Borough Code of Ordinances, Vehicles and Traffic. So moved.
Second.
Yep. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All that opposed? Alright. Motion passes, thank you. Under police, a motion to hire James Pasqualino as a police officer as per the civil service rules and regulations, conditional upon completing a successful mental health evaluation.
So moved.
Second.
Alright, Any-
Mr. President, can I address
yes.
council? So we had a number of community residents who came and gave some very pointed questions, wanting to know about statistics, a lot of it about cost, very little about their own safety or the safety of the police officers. And what I'd like to do is to underscore the fact that we had the discussions financially during the 2018 budget meetings, and that we did find a way to put it in the budget in a way that was not compromising anyone or anything, nor did it put us in danger of having to raise taxes. So I'd like to say that. But then I'd like to address some specifics. As Mr. Amendola said, what resources we've used, we have, the police chief has done some extensive research, has given us quite a few numbers. I personally have done more statistical analysis, since data's my thing. Nationally speaking, there is an index of average officers per 1,000 residents, which is one of the metrics that Mr. Sindrick mentioned. And the lowest one is Oregon with 1.6. And at that rate, that would put us at just about 10 when we take into account the 5,800 residents of Crafton and the 500 residents of Thornburg, and that that they have to patrol 1.5 miles square, half of it not contingent with our border. So then to go into neighborhood scout data, which the chief gave us some information, but it was compared to the state overall. And I thought that that was probably not accurate way to look at it. So I decided to do that same research over our neighbors. So let me start with the information at Neighborhood Scout data for 2017 Crafton. We have 100 being the safest number. Crafton has been assigned a number 10. Their annual crimes that they list: violent, 12, property, 216 for a total of 228. A per 1,000 residents number, that is a 2.07 for violent, for property 37.22, a total 39.29 crimes per 1,000 per year, and the number of crimes per square mile per year of 199. Now, before we think that that is all that our police are doing, I would like to point out that no one will need to have a FOIA report, but there is a summary report that is given to council and probably can be available to anyone who asks, that gives you details of the types of calls that our police officers are doing day in and day out. We were given by the chief the last 3 years. I cannot speak to the early 2000s or the middle 2000s. And as Mr. Amendola has said, it's much, the chances for violence escalating is much higher. We are not the same community we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let alone 15 years ago. So what these reports for the last 3 years say is that our officers are responding to plus or minus 3,000 calls a year, not including the traffic calls. The traffic calls are plus or minus 700 in addition to that. Then I picked out a number of types of calls that would be interesting to the community, and also the types of calls that have a potential to escalate to higher violence. Fires, we have, at this point, we have 42 in 2018 that our police have to go to. We had alarms that did not include fires of over 200. We had 8 assaults. We have about 40 to 50 over the last few years where we are assisting other agencies. These are, a lot of them unknown, and if other agencies are looking for our assistance, it's because they need help and they are likely in dangerous situations. The one figure that I do not have and haven't had a chance to ask about is how often we have had to ask other agencies to assist our officers in Crafton. Beyond that, we have 10 or so burglaries and robberies a year. We have over 200 disturbances and disorderlies. We have around 100 domestics, and I can tell you that those are about the most dangerous response calls that an officer can get. We've had 10 to 12 to 20 in the last 3 years dead on arrivals, which could be natural causes, or they could have been the result of violence and have the danger of violence escalating. We have about 30 calls that are specific for drugs, another couple dozen for DUI, also potential for escalation there. Harassments around 40 and 50. Hit and runs, you might be surprised that in this 1 mile We have, for the last 3 years, had between 39 and 45 hit and run accidents in this, just in our square mile. They also respond to approximately 600 medical emergency and assistant calls and over close to 300 suspicious persons and other suspicious activity going on, and we're around 200 thefts. Out of those are the highlights of these reports. There are many other calls. As I said, those do not add up to the whole 3,000. But the number of calls per year of the type that have potential escalation for danger to residents and to our officers is hovering right around 800 per year. So when we look at these numbers and we think about the fact that we have 8 patrolling officers and a chief who has to get in the car and patrol himself in order to give us coverage, when we consider three shifts a day, days off, vacation days, sick days, and court time, which is another thing that I didn't bring in here about how many officer days go to court dates and court time. There is, hands down, I think we have all of the numbers that we need and all of the understanding that we have every right and we have the affordability, we have the revenue to cover another officer, and that we fall actually almost below the lowest per officer per 1,000 residents in this country. Thank you. If anybody's got any questions, I have and would be happy to turn over to the manager so she can print out for any residents and for the rest of the council. I have those numbers that I talked about for Crafton. I have them for Pittsburgh, Carnegie, Dormont, Bridgeville, Coraopolis, and McKees Rocks. I would like to let you know that Greentree, Ingram, and Heidelberg have all locked out their statistics from this site. So we do not have those statistics available. And we are more like the city of Pittsburgh than we are our neighbors. And the only other neighbor that is higher than we are is McKees Rocks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice presentation.
Thank you. Anybody else have any?
Yeah, just to hit on a couple of things that was said there. You know, when an officer's out there working alone and he makes an arrest, he's tied up for a couple of hours with that arrest, doing paperwork and babysitting that guy until he needs to go to the county jail. He's working by himself. We've got to depend on these other communities to come over and help us and patrol our community. So, I mean, we should do everything we can to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Amador.
I have some comments. I have a prepared statement if I have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Kraus.
It's not as short as Fred's, but it's, I hope to keep it as fast as possible. A couple things first, just to respond to Ms. Perry and Mr. Amendola. First things first, if a school massacre is going to be handled, or is going to happen here in this town, it's not going to be handled at the borough level, just by the Crafton police alone. There's going to be assistance from the county, the state police, the FBI, Greentree, Ingram. Every single department is going to swoop in here, like they did in the Tree of Life situation. So I think, will Crafton be first on the scene? Absolutely. But I think Mr. Amendola is fear-mongering, and I think it's disingenuous. And secondly, let's address Mr. Amendola's scores here. This is from a website called areavibes.com. It's a Google search response. What is this compared to? Where is the data drawn from? This is just something I can find on the internet, and if he would have told me he was going to use this, I'd have done it for him. So let me get to my remarks. You know, recently I was reading about one of my favorite topics, Cold War history, and I ran across an interesting quote from President Reagan. In 1987, at a summit with Mikhail Gorbachev, he used a Russian proverb when dealing with the Soviet Unions over nuclear arms. Trust, but verify. So I'm going to take that advice here tonight. I'm going to spare everybody platitudes and just state for the record, I support the Crafton police. I'm not anti-police. I want the department to be a nice place to work for our officers, one where they can be successful in their careers. and one where they can be lifers and retire if they so choose. I've had nothing positive interactions with our department. From the chief on down, the officers seem to be sincere that they care about Crafton Borough. And we should be proud of the officers who represent this community as they put their lives on the line every day when they come here to work. These men and women have families, and they carry a burden on their shoulders that I can never fully understand, and I admit that. It's fine. But I believe in community policing, and I believe that we as a community should understand what this department's going to need and do our best to support them. Fine. And I believe that the department needs to understand what the community it serves needs and do what's best for Crafton. So what I don't want to have happen is what's happening right now. The police department is being used for political gain by council members with secretive agendas. Our officers aren't on trial here tonight, neither is the chief. And we shouldn't be using them as political footballs. So before voting, we need to slow down and ask some questions about why we need this officer right now. So I'd like to ask my fellow council members and members of the audience here tonight, and anyone watching on YouTube later to do what President Reagan asked us to do, and trust but verify. Now, first off, I'd like to remind everybody that the police negotiations between the borough and the police union are scheduled for this year. So we should let that process play out first. And I think we all know how public sector negotiations go. By the end of it, the police and the borough will meet somewhere in the middle. So would it not be prudent to wait that process out and see how it is decided, and see if another officer is needed? We have officers here now that we need to take care of. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. And they have a right to negotiate. Frankly, if another officer is needed, I prefer we hear it through the union negotiations or from the chief of police himself, not Mr. Amendola, not Ms. Perry. Because has he been tasked with negotiating on behalf of the chief of police or behalf of the police union? Or did he usurp that authority out of some misbegotten delusion of grandeur where he has to play a central role in every story? Did they ask Mr. Amendola to come to council and ask for an additional officer? Or is he doing an end around the police union and asking for things that they may not want? I don't know that. Because the negotiations haven't happened yet and I've been left in the dark. So my question to Mr. Amendola, Councilwoman Perry, and Mayor Bloom, they've served on previous Crafton councils. Why do we need this officer right now? What circumstances have changed precipitously since they were on council in 2015, 16, and 17? Because I've been left in the dark on this. Now, these police reports, you guys can FOIA this. This is what we got on Thursday. Now, this states that calls have decreased. Mr. Amendola and Ms. Perry served on council before I came on board. Were they pounding the table for an officer then?
Yes.
No, you weren't. Our calls didn't go up in that time. And if there's nothing to report here at council in an open session, in the mayor's reports, we don't get a mayor's report, we don't get a chief of police report, then why the need for an extra officer? And if the officers need another patrolman, maybe they'd like to collectively bargain that. So what's different now? Could it be that the Duncan property loan is set to come off the books? So is this need for an officer simply some kind of power grab Mr. Amendola is going to use? Ms. Perry, a rush to get some money for their cause before it can be used on public works, or park improvements, or stormwater remediation? Because I think that it is. And if so, I don't believe there should be a rush to spend that money, but it seems that Mr. Amendola and Ms. Perry have taken it upon themselves to embark on an expedition to spend it as fast as they possibly can. So let's state for the record here and now that that money, the odd $100,000 or so that was budgeted for the officer, should stay in a rainy day fund until we figure out what we need to use it for. So let's keep it away from those with secretive political agendas. And let's have an open and transparent process with the public. Let you guys weigh in as what you want to spend that money on. Do you want more police? I want to hear from you. So to that point, does anybody run their household the way we're running this borough? When you pay off your car, you take $500 and immediately go out and buy a new television with it? Or do you put that money in a 401k? Maybe you set it aside for a kitchen remodel. Now, Mr. Amendola's request for a new officer is very perplexing to me, because Mr. Amendola has made it clear in the past that he does not wish to bind future councils financially. And he's made it very clear that he doesn't like to see money spent in the town. But this is exactly what he's asking us to do. This officer isn't going to be a one-time cost. It's tantamount to a large investment, a long-term spending project. It's like a human infrastructure project. This is gonna be over $1 million over 10 years. So is a new officer gonna lead to some deficit spending here in the borough? And if so, which council member would like to ask the members of the public to raise their taxes? Raise your hands. Now, I shudder to think of a more sinister option. And I don't even want to say it out loud, but I will. Is our manager going to have to take money out of the road fund that's set aside for roads that aren't being fixed, mind you, to pay for this officer down the road? Now, if so, when was this fact going to come before council? Or was it just decided behind closed doors that this is the way it was going to be? Now, every department in this borough, in my opinion, needs to be funded properly, and all parts of the community need investment. We can't kick the can down the road on the swimming pool and the parks and the roads and our sewers so we can play some kind of zero-sum game where we only fund the police at the expense of everything else, because that's what Mr. Amendola wants. Now, how is this council going to be able to tell residents that there isn't enough money to prevent their basements from flooding this summer when the rain inevitably happens, but the ex-cop got his piece of the pie? So it's all good, because, you know, they got what they wanted. But we can't help you with paving your street. I'm sorry about that. Now, frankly, I don't feel that there has been any good faith negotiation between members of council who want this officer and the members that were on the fence. We didn't talk about budgeting additional overtime to fill gaps. We haven't talked about adding part-time officers. All we were told is that we needed to have a police officer right this very minute. So, to go back to President Reagan, I'm losing some trust in the process because I'm trying to verify what these agendas are. Now, I'm going to pose a question to our constituents. Do you want members of council to spend your tax dollars and be bullied into doing so? I think not. Mr. Amendola told us behind closed doors that he would take it very personally if we didn't support another officer, as he was pointing fingers and making accusations. Now, I don't care if you work at a private company or in the public space or for a nonprofit. How can any member of council be expected to do what is right under circumstances like that? I think the time for bullying and backroom politics is over. I don't think we should make any more speeches and debate this in executive session. What I'd like to see have happen is a deliberative process take place. One where we hear from the public, one where we hear from the officers who might be affected by an extra officer, and one where we can weigh in on it in a transparent and open way, not to be held hostage, because Mr. Amendola doesn't like to play nice to others. So let's talk about how we got to this point, because back in November we had a budget meeting that was not recorded, and where only one member of the community was in attendance. And to my knowledge, meeting minutes weren't kept. Now, were members of council, when they arrived, we were given budget options to choose from. We didn't weigh in on it. No one called me and said, hey, what do you think about a cop? And at that meeting, and all the meetings that followed, it was just decided as a fait accompli that we're going to have an officer, without a debate. So let's reorganize this information another way, especially for those who come to council on a regular basis. This is what we get from our engineers. This is what we see from them on a regular basis. This includes flow rates and the diameter of pipes and cost analysis for brick versus concrete. This is what I got from Mr. Amendola, a printout from Google.
I didn't get that. That came from the chief of police.
And I apologize
He
to
took
Mr.
a complete
Mr.
packet.
Kraus has the floor. Thank
You
you.
must have
Mr.
missed
Kraus
most
has
of it.
Mr. Kraus has the floor.
My point is this is how you make a business case when you want to spend taxpayer money. This is the due diligence you do. When I asked the mayor and Fred for some information at our budget meeting, and I asked them to make their business case, they sneered. Trust the process, I was told. Why do you need to know that? Just give us an officer. Now, when I asked the mayor for information back in November, when we were sitting here discussing the budget, I got a diatribe about how I didn't need to know that information because I never served. I'm not law enforcement. I get it. I'm a long-haired dude that runs his mouth. I get it. But there is no trust in this negotiation from the start. And when we tried to verify what we needed to verify, I got a lecture and a sneer. Now, I asked for this stuff in November. I got this on Thursday night. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there was an email from RJ in our email box saying, go get some packet from the borough? It's because, oh, there's a vote on Monday. So let's throw some papers at them and get our copy. It's perfunctory. It's disingenuous. They waited until Thursday. If they were, like I said earlier, if they were going to print off something from Google, I'd have done it myself. Now, to Mr. Amendola, Ms. Perry, and Mayor Bloom, you didn't trust our process. You didn't trust that we could make up our minds and determine if we were going to support a 10th officer. I would have supported your officer if you had made your case in November. And let me explain to you how this could have went. Before the budget meeting, you could have called me, called Phil, called Abby, called Marcia, and said, hey guys, here's a heads up. We think we might need another cop this fiscal year. So we want to use some money from the Duncan loan. But don't be alarmed. RJ's got a budget that you weren't expecting. We'll be happy to answer all of your questions and be available if you need us. Let's take it slow and make sure we do it right and get what we need. You didn't act in good faith. And if you did, you could have had your officer tonight, I think. But you didn't want to trust this process, so here we are. So to my colleagues on the other side, I will leave it at this. You have to recognize that the way we've structured democracy, not just here in the borough, but all the way up to the state and federal level, that you have to take into account that people won't always agree with you 100% of the time. This is not an issue that needs black and white rigidity. This is not how we're not going to say to each other, oh, this is how it's going to be, my way or the highway. Now, we're small enough of a town where these decisions should be made and negotiated in good faith right out here in the open right from the start. And I don't care what the agenda item is. I don't care if it's a park or a police officer or sewage or whatever you want to do. Negotiating in bad faith and bullying others weakens your overall movement and gets you nowhere. And at the end of that, no one can trust anybody else and no one can verify anything. So I urge all of you here tonight to vote no on the motion. Let's take this slow and see where we go. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, can I have the floor for a moment, please?
Yes, Ms. Perry.
Okay, let's start with bullying. What the heck was that statement? Telling the community that it's one thing or the other. And also painting a picture as though none of you were involved. Mr. President, I know you were the one who asked RJ to put the officer in the budget in the first place.
Actually, no, I was not. You were. There's actually a piece of paper that supports that.
At our budget meeting, you had, before the budget meeting, you called, you talked to a number of us, and you said you wanted it considered.
Okay, so I'm being asked about the worksheets.
Just let me finish my statement.
Worksheets.
All right?
Thank you. Continue. Yeah.
Can I see those?
Yeah. So let's start with the fact of educating that it isn't one or the other necessarily, and also to educate our community of the role of the mayor. And it is the mayor's responsibility for the police force. And he is the one who came to us in appropriate executive session about personnel, asking us to consider it. He gave us the numbers last summer. He's asked for this before. Everyone has been waiting for us to be able to have the resources and to make sure that our house is in good order. And if anybody is being disingenuous, Mr. Kraus, it is you.
Thank you, Ms. Perry.
Can I have the floor?
No, I'm actually going to take a moment. Just for clarification to the public, I spoke with the chief of police last year, knowing that Mr. Amendola would like to bring this forward in the budget season. Mr. Sumter told me that it would be best to wait, as he had a perspective as a member of management, until the police negotiation.
Not true.
Yes, very
Mr.
sure.
Mayor?
So thank you, Mr. Amendola, you may have the floor.
I take objections to what you said about hidden agendas and all that kind of thing. I have the worksheets here. After our first budget meeting, we were asked to fill out these worksheets, and RJ wanted to know if there was anything that we wanted to talk about or do with the budget in the second budget meeting. And Mr. Kraus, you filled out yours, park shelter and some kind of inspection thing, parks, and then you said, your last line said, C. Perry Coletta, which I would take that to mean to look at her worksheet and you would agree with whatever she had on her worksheet. And the third item on her worksheet, 410.12, was factor in a new police officer. That was the second budget meeting. We all agreed on this. Phil agreed on it. Everyone here agreed on it. And so we passed that budget knowing that we were going to hire an officer probably in April. We waited till, we wanted to wait till April, but you were the one, you told me personally that you agreed that it was a good idea. And the only reason you changed, the only reason you changed your mind was because you know that I am against you guys borrowing $10 million in a bond issue. When I told, excuse me, I got the floor.
Yes.
Mr. President.
Yep.
You told us a couple of weeks ago that you guys are getting together with financial people and you want to borrow $10 million, and that is when you changed your mind about this police officer. So don't tell me it's political stuff that I'm bringing to the board. It's political stuff that you're bringing to the board, bringing up this contract. You know what most municipalities around us have in their contract? They have that the police officer will not work by himself. Green Tree has it, some of the other municipalities, Carnegie has it. They won't work by themselves. They want to work with 2 officers. We haven't been asked that by our department yet, but we will be eventually.
Thank you.
Mr. Amendola refuses to
Mr. Have you
I
ceded the floor?
have the floor. Can I respond to the comments, please?
I'm taking your pause as you're finished.
I'm finished.
Mr. Amendola refuses to let the police negotiate on their own behalf. He thinks because he's an ex-cop, he's owed something. He's used to playing one way where he gets to make the rules and everybody has to follow, and that's not how councils work, that's not how democracies work. A budget meeting is not a final vote, folks. A budget is a guideline, it's a roadmap, and that can change. They fail to realize this. Now, who was here was at the budget meeting? Great. Mr. Neiman can at least lend some credence to this. Mr. Amendola was so upset that he perceived that we would not support his 10th officer that he accused members of council of not believing in the police. That's not true.
It is true.
No, it's not. I just talked for 20 minutes about how I support the police. What I don't support is a bully. What I don't support is you used to getting your own way and taking it on everybody who doesn't agree with you. If they want another cop, let them negotiate it. Period. You were not tasked to be their representative in a negotiation. You were not. Neither was I. So, you can say what you'd like, and I'm going to say what I'd like. And we're going to disagree, and that's fine. Now, I don't remember any...
You were for this up to just a couple of weeks ago.
I don't remember any phone call with Mr. Amendola a few weeks ago. I don't speak with Mr. Amendola outside of council. Any characterization to that effect is untrue. What he likes to do is make up a story and pretend that he's the central actor in everything that he does, and it's all about his deal making, it's all about him.
May I say something somewhere?
Yes.
Yes. Alice?
Mr. Kraus, it seems that all you want to do is bash another person. That's all you seem to want to be doing right here. I think that there has been a lot of statistics that have been put on the table. We want to make this town safe, and I have to agree. I feel that we have to have this other police officer without you going back and forth, badgering one person, saying it's for a political step up. I think that is the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard. We have had very strong statistics. We have had statistics from Miss Perry. We have had Chief Sumter coming up with
Can I respond
No.
to the gentleman's comments?
The mayor asked to have comments. Mr. Mayor.
This, excuse me. This whole thing started, the request for a new police officer came from me, did not come from Fred Amendola. I made the request and I submitted it to council in an executive session. And the reason I submitted it in an executive session was information that shouldn't be in the public about officer safety, okay? This is what started this, was officer safety, okay? We have two communities we police, okay? Crafton and Thornburg, and we've been patrolling Crafton and Thornburg. I did it, Officer Amendola did it for many years. I know what went on in this town, and I know about the homicides that happened in this town, and I know that the cultural changes that have come by in the last few years are making a police officer's job so dangerous that I did 31 years, would not want to put a suit back on. You watch the news every day, and police officers getting shot and killed at a simple traffic stop. It just happened again the other day. That's why I want 10 officers. We had 10 officers in Crafton. Anybody know that? Mr. Sidrick knows we had 10 officers in Crafton, and we got that under a federal grant. That's where Sergeant Harbison was hired under a federal grant. And when the grant played out after 3 years, council would not continue with the 10th officer. And so when there was a retirement, we went back to 9 officers. You know, right now, there's 246 days a year that come off for vacation and bonus days for the officers in this department. 246. Okay, if you look at 9 officers, there's 42 shifts a week with 2 guys on duty. Okay, you'd start taking away 246 days a year for just vacation and bonus days. That doesn't count a nickel if somebody calls off sick, and he calls off sick an hour or 2 hours before his shift. That doesn't count if there's an officer that gets injured, whether it be at home or in the line of duty. That now you're going to have down to 8 officers, which only covers 40 shifts a week. With 8 officers, 5 times 8 is 40, and there's 42 shifts in a week with 2 officers. So think about it. So with vacations and excuse me, with illness and that, and the way culture's changed is, I have a lot of serious concern that I have police officers out there on the street by themselves at night at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when we're all cuddled up in bed, and they're out there and they pull up on a traffic stop and some yo-yo comes out with a gun. And it happens every day. And you know what? Crafton is right next to the city of Pittsburgh. We have a lot of crime that comes into Crafton from other areas. I'm not saying that you look at these statistics, okay? You look at the statistics. That doesn't include what we get coming from the city. You know, it's just a big difference now than when I did the job. I mean, I can remember homicides that I've been to, I've been on duty, you know, and the homicides, luckily, the days that I was on, there was 2 officers on duty to make the initial calls, you know, but nowadays it's just, and that's why I came to council. I came to council last year and made the request for an officer. I didn't want this turned into some political mumbo-jumbo where they're going back and forth. Hey, this is what an officer's going to claim. Ms. Perry, the paper that I served council had the initial facts. Is that right? We had the numbers on there. What an initial police officer would cost. I provided that. Okay? I didn't want this to turn into some type of a show, a political show, that I might have to give to you information that should be kept private, about specifically to deal with the safety of my police officers. That the number of guys on duty, and when they're on duty, how many. You know, you never can just say in 1 second how things are going to change. And they, compared to when I started in 1975 to compare they are now, no way would I do this job. It's too crazy out there. And it scares me to have one guy working. It scares me. And yeah, we have mutual aid. We have mutual aid with Ingram, Robinson, Greentree, whatever. But you only say that when you know, okay, they're mutual aid. Well, what are they doing? Maybe you're assisting them when another one comes in over here. Or maybe they can't assist you because they're already on call. I got one guy. Okay, one guy. A lot of times a year. And that's why I make a request to council. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'd like the floor if I can have it, please.
Yes, Mr. Cross.
So I'd like to defend myself against Ms. Glasser's comments. You guys want to make this about me, that's fine, but I don't think that's where this argument needs to go. And to the mayor, respectfully, they aren't your police officers, they are our officers. And if you had given this level of transparency to this body when we were in our budget meetings, we wouldn't be having this problem right now.
This is the level of transparency.
Miss Perry,
Forget it.
Miss Perry.
He gave
Miss
us that information
Perry.
last summer.
Miss Perry, please.
I am not listening to this any longer.
Then don't. You can see how they act when they don't get what they want. This is what they do. They want to make it about a personal vendetta, which it's not. I support the police. There's different ways to skin this cat, and we haven't had that discussion. We were told with a lecture from the mayor that, we need a cop right now, and this is the way it's going to be, guys, so let's do it. I don't want to be leaned on like that. Do you guys want to be leaned on like that? No. So Ms. Perry
All
can
right,
storm
let's
out of
just
the
go to a
room.
vote. Let's just go to a
Let's call
vote.
it.
We all know where everybody's
Let's
gonna
call the vote.
land anyway, so
There's
let's
two
just do
members
the
of
damn
council.
vote.
There's two members of council not in the room. Does any other member of council have any comments? All right. Well, when the two members of council come back, we'll take a vote. We're going to take a 3-minute recess. Thank you. All right. Everybody catch your breath.
Pass out the budget.